Well, welcome back into the King's Forge. We're having discussions on callings. We've talked about the calling into relationship or salvation. We've talked about the calling into discipleship. And tonight we're going to be talking about the calling into general ministry. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Alrighty, we're in the King's Forge here, and we got Randy, myself, and we got Erica and Summer at the table for the discussion. And we're discussing the call to general ministry. And what I mean by that is that this is not specialized or specified ministry like being a pastor or a Sunday school teacher. This is the general mission of the body of Christ and what that looks like. What aspects can we bring to the table? We may all somewhat agree. We may disagree. Let's find out. Who'd like to open the floor with sort of what you think the general ministry looks like?
I would.
Go ahead.
I think, Jesus said it best when he said, clothe the naked, feed the hungry, take care of the widows and the children.
Mm-hmm.
He also said, take up a sword. And that could be a call to general ministry, too.
Are you referring to like the calling to military service or sacrifice or that kind of thing? Is that what you are alluding to? Or
I guess maybe defending your faith. That could be a ministry.
Mm-hmm.
Could it, you think?
There are ministries that are apologetics, and that's what this fancy word of saying defending the faith. Yeah, so. Oftentimes we get into situations where we go to church and we don't often fully immerse ourselves in the ministry of the body of Christ on a day-to-day basis. And what I mean by that is we don't oftentimes, and now I understand there are places that at times it's inappropriate to do so. But oftentimes when we have those times and places where we can witness to people, where we can discuss the faith, where we can just share with people and get their experience, there are a lot of times that we are, for whatever reason, reluctant to do so. And I think when we find ourselves in that state that we are missing an opportunity to be more active in generalized ministry. Any kind of volunteer work where you're volunteering for the purpose of helping another human being in any fashion. There are many nonprofit organizations that are designed to give people assistance. Those are types of ministries. There's healthcare ministries. There's all kinds of things. And the question I think comes down to the believer is, have you ever considered for yourself how to minister within the capacity and boundaries of your job position and your life position? How do you be active in the work of the body of Christ where you are? And what challenges you might face?
Well, that's very important, particularly where it comes into somebody who works outside of the church, which is the majority of Christians.
Right.
To take Christ into your workplace. And maybe that is another one of the issues with the church today, are people who may not realize that they are in the mindset where they're Christians or church goers on Sundays, and then they're not for the rest of the week. So how do you take Christ into the workplace? And it is all about, first of all, living that lifestyle. But when you do that, it means that you're also open to those opportunities where somebody will see you being Christ-like, know you go to church, and will come and ask you questions about your faith. And then you will have to be a good disciple, know your faith enough to be able to talk about it. And building relationships with people who don't know church, who don't know Christ at all. And also people may want to come and ask you because they say, well, this is a church-going person. Maybe if I need any assistance with food and clothing and those things, being able to ask that person and say, can you help me, or can I confide in you with this? That is one way to be in ministry outside of the church. That is a very simple thing that everyone can do. But I also feel, and I think this is very important, to understand that we all have gifts and skills. So, Paul says this in both Romans and I believe it's in Ephesians, talks about the gifts of Christians. That we have prophets, we have teachers, we have shepherds, we have people who are good at hospitality, people who are good at shepherding others and preaching or prophesying, as it's called in the Bible. And those gifts many times do not lead necessarily to a full-time career in the church, but to full-time work outside of the church, but it's still a gift from God. And so whatever you are doing, whatever you are gifted to do, whatever your gifts and your skills are, to recognize that that comes from God. And that to thank God for those gifts and skills, but also recognize that you should be using those gifts and skills for His glory as well. Even if you are teaching kindergarten, teach kindergarten for His glory, because He gave you the gifts and skills to do that. And to recognize what your gifts and skills are. Another thing, I think the church needs to work hard to recognize those gifts and skills in each other. Particularly from church leaders looking at the church members, those who are in full-time ministry, such as myself, being able to see the gifts and skills of my church people, recognize what they're good at doing, and encourage them in those tasks inside the church. And it could be leading a Sunday school class, it could be singing in the choir, it could be leading praise and worship, it could be working on the administration of the church, like someone who's good with finances, someone who's good with maintenance, building maintenance, and security. Knowing what those gifts and skills are, to also incorporate those into day-to-day church life as well is important.
So let me ask both of you this. Do you think that as a Christian that there will be, I'll use the term detractors, do you think people fear opposition, I guess is the question, from those people who either aren't Christian, or those people that I've encountered some of them that actually, for whatever reason, hold Christianity and all that they understand it to be in some form of contempt?
I do, and so we may not even realize that we do that, but it just may be just a desire for the Christian to relate to the non-Christian, or to seem kind, to seem cool, open, so that whether they recognize it, willing to admit it, or even know that they're doing it, they'll kind of shelter or hold down some of their Christian values or beliefs, whether they're keeping them quiet or they're living a life that may not seem very Christian while they're at work, just so they can relate to those who are not. It could be a situation where if you want to share Jesus with this person, they're non-Christian, and so you want to build a relationship, that's great and wonderful. But don't do so at the risk of your own values and beliefs. You can build a relationship with people and not compromise what you believe in. You can still seem kind, fun, have a great sense of humor, and still be a Christian. It may not be like a fear of those who don't believe, or even a fear of yourself, but just, I just want to fit in type mentality.
Were you mainly talking about in the workplace?
Well, it could be in the workplace. I mean, in
workplace.
general, but if you have something specific, sure.
Well, I have the opportunity that the company that I work for is a Christian company. No discrimination on denomination, or not discriminative of if you're a non-Christian. I'm sure there's non-Christians that work there. Behaviors, I don't see behaviors that would show that they're of the world, mainly because we're highly regulated. Attitudes can be another subject. But I think if I do encounter an attitude, it's because it's a stressful job, and being in a administrative position, you lead by example. So when it comes to work, from my point of view, I'm blessed to work around individuals that have a calling, no matter where that calling is on a scale. It's a hard job, and it's definitely not a job that you just get for a paycheck. So maybe I am biased in that point of view from a work standpoint.
Well, I think every disciple, every person who is a believer in Jesus Christ is called into the general ministry of the faith. And I think that I don't think the church does enough to emphasize that to the body. I don't think many Christians, or at least a lot that I've encountered, they never have thought, nor have they ever been led to think or instructed to think of their life and their career as a life of ministry, and how I can use this to live out my discipleship, my Christianity. Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of times it's a situation of I don't know how. And if you're blessed enough to be in an environment like you have, where you know full well that you are working for a company that has Christian values and proclaim them openly, we are a Christian business. Even if you yourself are not a Christian, you typically can understand what those values hold. We want ethics, a certain moral code, and a certain customer relationship with our clients that holds to a certain standard, of kindness and fealty and all those kind of things. And you can conform to that, or learn to conform to that as much as you can. I think the benefit of that situation is that if you're not a Christian and you enter into a company that's openly a Christian-owned business and operating with Christian ethics, that might intrigue you to investigate further, what is this really all about?
And I think it's also in at least for the company that I work for, the building that I work for, there are great examples of what it's all about. I know every morning we have a morning meeting, and the group of us, we pray over the building. And then we put those prayers into action, because that's what we believe. And you have great examples. I've seen people from the office to being in maintenance to being in housekeeping, nurse, all the departments, you have someone that's actively passing. We're in that room holding that person's hand, praying over them, just being there, with being respectful to their wants and wishes. But you lead by example. And not to say that we're perfect and we're not human, and given the stressful environment, you get tested daily.
Mm-hmm.
But I look at it as a great opportunity, at least speaking of myself, that when I feel that I'm being tested, I bring it back to Jesus. There's a lot of times I'm just like, your will, not mine, Lord. Just walk in front of me. Because even though we are Christians living in the world, whether it's in our workplace, in the grocery store, in a public park, even in our own house, we can be tested. And it says in the Bible, you're going to go through trials and tribulations. I think it's how you respond and who you go to, who you run to, is one of the things that matters.
Mm-hmm. And I notice a lot of our conversation, we're talking about how to deal with those people who may be our work peers, those people we work alongside. But also I'd like to talk about the supervisor-employee relationship, because as an employee, with answering to those who are above you, supervisor, boss, whatever you want to call it, your attitude and conduct speak volumes. And if you're the kind of employee that seems genuinely disinterested in the work that you're doing, you seem wholly focused on the paycheck at the end of the week and waiting till 5 o'clock every day, and then you're doing a disservice not only to yourself, not only to the business, but you're doing a disservice to your belief system, your Christianity, because that speaks volumes of every aspect that you claim to be a part of. And so people will look at that, and I can see a reasonable expectation. I hope all Christians aren't like that if they've never encountered that before, or if it's the first time they're thinking about that. And of course, that's just a very narrow generalization, but that kind of thing carries over, and vice versa. If you are a Christian who is in a supervisory role, it is incumbent upon you not only to uphold the policies of the place wherein you work, but also to do so in such a way that's not overly heavily handed and has understanding to the situations that your employees may be in. I recall years and years ago, I worked for a company that made interior parts for the Nissan Corporation. And I had to drive about a half an hour or so to work every evening. I worked the night shift back then. This was many, many years ago. And I blew a tire on the way to work. And I was just frantic, knowing there's no way I can change the tire and be on time. I knew I was going to be late. And it was literally eating me up. I changed the tire, did everything I had to do, and got back in the car and headed on down the road. But I got to work, I was like 10, 15 minutes late. And, I told the supervisor, and of course he could see my hands and stuff, the soil and stuff that was on them. I'm like, I blew a tire. I had to change the tire. I'm sorry. And I was expecting a reprimand or a scolding or whatever. And he's like, oh, man, no problem. It happens to everybody. So just go ahead and get yourself ready, completely understanding, never said a word. And I'm like, I was worried for this whole time, thinking that I was going to get chewed out for being late, because I don't know why. He was never a heavy-handed guy, but I'd never been on that side, where I'm like going, because we were on a schedule. Things had to start at a certain time, and you worked as a team. And so to operate the machine that I was operating, it took a 3-man team. If one man's not there, that hinders 2 other people. So there was a little bit of pressure involved in that too. But I will never forget the fact that he was totally cool. I get it, it's totally unavoidable, And so we have to conduct ourselves that way too. We have to be understanding, but at the same time, we have to be firm enough to go, okay, when something is totally across the line, it may be the point that we have to let somebody go or write somebody up.
Disciplinary action.
Disciplinary action. And even when we give disciplinary action, we have to be aware of how we're perceived,
Yes.
and we have to make every effort to be clear, honest, and fair, and caring, even though we're engaging in disciplinary action.
And I don't know if you want to call it a fault, but I try to see the potential in everyone.
No, that's not a fault. That's a
and,
gift.
And I try to let them know that. From my point of view and what I do, from Jump Street, the beginning of the hiring process, we make it evident that we want people that have a servant's heart and a calling. Now, of course, you'll get people in there that can talk a good game, and even after multiple interviews and the honeymoon phase of working, you can tell the ones that are there for a paycheck. You just hope that something catches, that they see a need and they feel it, and you do your best to lead by example, with understanding, but not being a pushover.
Now, outside of I say outside of work environment, it's not totally outside of a work environment, but it's not a 9-to-5 job environment. Years ago, at a church that I was heavily involved with at that particular point in time, we had a program involving our youth that was called Mission Possible. And in Mission Possible, we focused 1 week out of the middle of the summer, and the kids that were part of the youth group came and slept at the church, and we had, of course, adult chaperones there with them. And these adult crews, we would divide the youth into, and we had a large youth, so we were able to divide them into like 4 or 5 teams. And they would go around the community doing service work for people who were shut in or elderly or couldn't do for themselves. And we would start like in January sending questionnaires to people, the local community, who needs this, who needs that. And there was one, I'm going to relay this story because this will forever be a part of my memory, and I'm so grateful for the experience. This one group that I was part of the work chaperones for, we were working at a house, and there were 2 ladies that worked in this house. And one of the ladies, of course, we saw, and we knew, well, or at least I knew, I don't think that the youth were aware, that she was a caregiver for her mother, who was in the house. They had a fence around the yard. A tree had fallen over and demolished a portion of the fence. The tree had to be cut up, hauled off. We had to repair and sort of stand up and repair and rebuild a portion of the fencing. And while we were doing that, the youth that were there, we had a group of course, we can't let them use power tools, so we had adults running the chainsaws, and the youth were stacking and moving lumber. But the youth, and we had another crew, said, okay, you guys do some weed eating and yard mowing. They're mowing the yard. And they got to look, and they got to notice that the shutters in the house were damaged. They got to notice in that the drains, the gutters weren't draining water efficiently. And so they just took it upon themselves and started going in. And the lady's mother, we found out later, there was, and for discretion, there was an unpleasant aroma that was coming from the garage, which was attached to the home. And they opened their home to the kids and stuff that needed to go and use the restroom, and they one by one would wave to mom who they had a bed in the living room, And this lady was so impressed that she came out and they made lunch. And we had our lunches with us, but they made sandwiches and things and went out on the deck to eat lunch with the kids while we were taking our lunch break. and the kids were witnessing to her and talking with her and laughing. And the younger of the two ladies, the daughter, was in tears. And me and another person walked over to her. We're talking with her, and because I was concerned, is everything okay? And she said, my mom hasn't been out of the house in a couple of years. And that kind of sparked us. She was in a chair. And then we started noticing, I'm like, is she ambulatory, or is she always in that chair? So no, she's always in the chair. Well, then we realized there's no wheelchair ramp on this house. How does she get out? And the daughter was not physically able to have the strength to pull a woman in a wheelchair down the steps or anything. And so we're looking at this, and we thought, well, maybe we can go get lumber.
You can't pull a wheelchair down the steps; they'll topple over.
Well, yeah, but you know what I mean. Yeah, let her down. But we couldn't. We said, we need to have wheelchair access for this lady, And if something, God forbid, if something were to happen, that the emergency services would need to, an effective way to get in and out of the house as well. So we decided we're going to build her a wheelchair ramp, and we looked in the garage, and the garage was filled with garbage because they lived in a place where they didn't have city garbage haul off, and they couldn't effectively get the garbage out. And so the lady had been basically putting it in the garage, and it was knee deep or so. And I'm like, okay, well, there's the aroma. And so we gloved up with gloves, and we cleaned everything out. We scrubbed the floor of the garage. We built a wheelchair ramp for the lady. And all of this, I say this to say, all of this, those youth were all behind it and 100% in. And all of this was their idea, and it has, and this was, I don't know, I want to say 10 years ago. But that particular instance, and I've done many of those, but that particular one is burned into my mind because of the joy they created and the fact that we witnessed these kids witnessing being Christian. And what I mean by witnessing is, like, you don't have to talk about Habakkuk. You don't have to talk about Matthew and Mark and Luke and John. You just simply have to have the love of Christ in your heart and love people. And yeah, they answered. And they talked about biblical topics. I mean, I'm not saying they didn't, but I'm saying it was the love, the genuine care and affection and love for another human being and their welfare that was communicated, and that's what touched the lives of these two women. And still to this day, if I'm not mistaken, there are still members of our youth that go and visit them. And like I say, this was 10 years ago, and those youth are now grown and out, Mm-hmm. And so those kind of things are being active in your ministry in whatever capacity you find yourself in. And it seems so easy. And yet, we will come up with every excuse not to engage. I remember one year we went and worked at a Thanksgiving, and we took our kids, and our kids were small. Benjamin was in a high chair, and we went and served food
to the needy.
And it was opened up. Free food as long as it lasted. Come in and have Thanksgiving for those people who couldn't afford it. And we saw people who were homeless. We saw some people who just didn't. They had a home, but they didn't have a whole lot. And we saw all kinds. And everybody, this whole facility became one giant family Thanksgiving dinner. And my kids got to experience all that. And that kind of thing is more rewarding than sitting around a table, even if it's got a bounteous supply of food on it, that with just our immediate family, because it builds connections in community, it builds people. Mm-hmm. And this is the kind of thing that we're talking about. So why do you think that we're often reluctant to take the step to do something like that?
I've got to say something really fast because it's just the way my brain works. and nothing to take away from the building of the ramp.
No, you're fine.
But the stretcher could go, if it was an EMT, it can go on the steps because the wheels retract and lower back down.
True.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're good.
Well, one reason why I think a lot of people will shy away from helping when I look at my congregation, for one, my congregation is kind of split into two. We have a really good number of kids and youth, and we have a really good number of those over the age of 50, maybe even over the age of 60 in our congregation. And I heard it today out of a church member, and this is nothing negative about the church. This is actually something that I think really needs to be worked on in terms of, we talk about how we need to reach the Gen X and the millennials and even Gen Z to get them to come to church. I believe a revival is happening among Gen Z, those in college, right out of college, those in high school. I believe that they're going to be fine, but there's not many millennials or Gen X individuals who go to church much. And what you wind up seeing happen in the churches is you have older individuals who have worked in the church for years, and they're burnt out, and they're tired, and they can't do much anymore. And they're wanting the younger generation to step up. However, some of them want the younger generations to step up and do things the same way they've done them, and the younger generations aren't gifted in that sense, if we can say it that way, or they're too busy with their lives, kind of going back to what we talked about before, with, wanting to, you have that work life, church life difference. And for those who have that difference, they're not going to volunteer that much in church. And so the story with your youth, that is one example of those kids just doing work that whether they were good at it or not, they were willing and they were able. And I think that's two things that are very important, because not only do you need to be willing, but you need to be able. And you can also run into a situation in a church particularly where you have people who are willing, but they're not able. And people who want to do something, use what they perceive as their gift or skill, but they really don't have that gift, or maybe it's just for a season and they burn themselves out, or there's no power there. I always tell my church people, all right, think what brings you passion and what is needed in the church. What do you see as a need, and what brings you passion? Sometimes it comes down to if someone is willing and they were once able, or they were willing but somehow they've gotten off track. Some of those disciplinary actions that you guys were talking about in the workforce has to happen in the church too. Mm-hmm. And that's really hard when you're dealing with volunteers.
Yeah.
When you're talking about your youth group, that's some of the most precious, and it's got to be black and white on your volunteers. Are they truly called and gifted? Are they safe? Are they able to serve? Truly doing those background checks, keeping them safe as well as your younger generation, keeping those kids and the youth safe as well, and making sure that people are truly using their gifts and skills for the glory of God and not for themselves.
Not having that selfish motive.
Mm-hmm. And I think some of it is also opening your eyes to opportunities that present themselves. It could be something as simple as helping someone who's either injured, disabled, or elderly to cross a street. That's an act of kindness and an act of ministry and support.
Yes.
And that's something that's not necessarily a lasting, continual effort. You see the need, it's there, you meet it, you move on. I've stopped and helped ladies with groceries that were trying to pick up things that were too thin, or had spilled some in the parking lot. You bend over and just help them pick it up. And oftentimes we don't do that. And I understand some of the trepidation that people sense where they don't know what's going on, this going on. There's a lot of uncertainty and fear in our world. I don't know what this person's like and everything. But the question, I think, at that point, what we need to ask ourselves, if you're truly a Christian, is not what scares me or what am I concerned over, but do I trust Christ enough to be Christ for this person right here and right now? And if you do, then by all means, go for it. Jump in. And if you don't, then I think now you have identified an area that you can, work on. Why is it that I'm finding a lack of trust? And how do I get over that?
You got to trust Christ. Get over fear of man.
Mm-hmm.
Quit being selfish. And remember, kindness is free.
Right. And just know that opportunities are everywhere. And ministry takes all forms. You don't have to be a healthcare worker. Teaching somebody to read, mentoring, being a mentor for children and stuff. That in and of itself is a type of ministry. There are legal ministries, helping people there's financial ministries, helping people get out of financial issues and trouble, help them overcome those things. Anywhere that there's a need that helps people improve their lives, get better, and simultaneously encourages them to be better people and more unified in their community and working together, you're in ministry. And that's a generalized ministry, and that's kind of what we're talking about today. And I'd like to thank everybody who listens to us regularly. We're so glad that you do. And those people who follow us on our videos and watch us regularly, let me apologize for my appearance. I have a great face for radio, I've been told. So the bottom line is be active. Be part of the conversation of Christianity, and that's what we're encouraging. Study your Bible, find out what those things that speak to your heart, and go engage in those, because that's where you're gifted. God's already telling you what to do. And don't take my word for it, nor take these ladies' words for it.
Definitely don't take mine.
Take the Bible's word for it, because where you find that inspiration is where God has already gifted you. Okay, and run with it and live happy, live full. We want you happy. We want you blessed. And if you have a topic that you would like for us to discuss, or maybe you have any questions, you can write to us at 1kingsforge@gmail.com. That's the number 1, kingsforge@gmail.com. Or you can reach us by post by writing the King's Forge, P.O. Box 2590, Shelbyville, Tennessee, 37160.
Snail mail.
If you want to find out more about who we are and what we do, you can visit our website at thekingsforge.org. Again, thank you so much. We're so blessed that you actually listen to us and that you watch us, and we're so glad to be a part of this conversation. We want you happy, we want you blessed, and we want to see you back here in the King's Forge.